All right, welcome everybody for this week's Wednesday evening study group, workshop, reading group, rising tide, thought digging section where we are exploring the realm of universal ideas. And we'd been discussing, we were introduced in our last reading session on how Jesus and his followers saved civilization to a phenomenal personality whom I didn't know existed until I had read that essay some years back, named Philo of Alexandria, Rabbi Philo, who, according to Eusebius, an early church father and historian of the church, himself a leading Platonist in the second century, or maybe early third century, records that Philo and Peter, Apostle Peter, were very closely allied, working together in Rome against the various pagan cults that were trying to destroy Christianity, both from without and from within. We were introduced some of the figures, some of the dramas, like the story of Simon the magician, the pseudo Christian who was doing some very, very disgusting things that would make Maria Abramovich probably pale, or at least uh, get squirm uncomfortably by some of the rituals that were going on back then. And again, Philo is really somebody who, when I began reading some of his writings, I was just so blown away. Especially having really immersed myself in a study of Plato and Plato's dialogues over the years, and I know Quan and Luke can definitely attest to this. You just get such a sense of the love of the realm of being, right? That is the at the heart of Augustine's City of God. This idea that there is a realm where that transcends the domain of change, of becoming, as Plato would call the second lower degree of reality, of flux. But beyond the realm of flux, there is this higher harmony, a higher justice that great philosophers, statesmen throughout the years have had in mind as a pattern or something to strive towards as they navigate through the realm of shadows, of lies, of intrigue, and of sophistry, where the false is made to appear true and vice versa, right? And and so Augustine describes this realm of the city in his City of God, and he codifies with that top-down perspective that you can judge a law as good or bad based upon whether it coheres with God's law, which also is not just a cold law or cold rule, but a law that also embodies a respect, a dignity for people's need for freedom, the spontaneity of the human experience that desires creativity and not just cold logic, right? So this is a higher idea of law than what we're often accustomed to. And in China, Quan led us through a series of something like 13 readings about a year ago on Mencius, who also developed this very similar, not similar, the same idea from a Chinese matrix that came to be understood as the Tianming principle of the mandate of heaven. Kevin's coming on. Cool. The other Kevin. So, um, Philo is somebody who I think is extremely important at this moment, especially the work that he did with the other like-minded soul of Peter, especially in the world that we're living in, where anti-Semitism has been given a lot of fuel to burn very, very intently due to the events, especially in the past 3 weeks. But really, it's been going on before that. But I think Netanyahu and other freaks have really done quite the service for the cause of anti-Semitism, and there's a desire to find an enemy image to hate that will explain all of our problems away with. And there's been something that's been very conveniently weaved for all of us to give our hate towards over the course of many centuries, even in the form of, the Jews, really big capital J. It's all that. And then we could stop thinking about any higher agency or anything else. So Philo is a really good, I think, introduction to a sane rabbinical humanistic principle, and his work on creation that we're going to begin reading tonight is really his Timaeus. He lived during the same time as Jesus. He lived out longer than Jesus, obviously. And as Robert Dreyfus really, really got across, and actually what's proven in is that and official church historians even agree with this, is that the very argument to justify the existence of the Trinity that was made at the Council of Nicaea was made due to the epistemological arguments that were laid out by Philo of Alexandria, by figures who were fighting the fight and who Augustine picked up the torch for later on in the 4th century. Origen of Alexandria, who was the lead librarian of Alexandria, preserved and saved all of Philo's writings when the first wave of destruction of that library of Alexandria occurred. It was only Philo's writings were only preserved because of Origen, who's another person we might even read some of his writings at some point. Incredible early church father. So let's just keep all of this in mind as much as we can as we begin to probe his commentaries on the books of Moses, which is what this On Creation is. It's where he's infusing a deep Pythagorean Platonic epistemology in interpreting what the books of Moses were all about. And this, again, has a whole current going straight through Moses Maimonides, to Moses Mendelssohn, and the entire Yiddish Renaissance movement of the 18th and 19th centuries, which was crushed by forces both within and without, just like we saw with the efforts to corrupt and destroy Christianity from within and from without. So too did we see the same sort of thing with the Jewish faith as well. So let's keep that in mind, and I'll hit a little screen share here. Oops, why is it not working? 1 second. If I open it. There we go. Can folks see On Creation?
Yes.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, make it big.
Yeah, that would help. That's better.
Too big.
Whoa.
No, I lost control. All right. I think that's better. Okay, and like usual, if people want to pause, ask a question, share a thought in the middle of the reading, that is okay. But like usual, I think we'll get this whole essay done in maybe 3 reading sessions, I'm hoping, maybe. I don't know. Either way, we'll end up stopping and we'll chat philosophical for as long as we want after we end. So who wants to be today's reader?
I'm happy to.
You're good at it?
Well,
okay. Cool.
On the Creation by Philo of Alexandria. Young's title, a treatise on the account of the creation of the world as given by Moses. Of other lawgivers, some have set forth what they considered to be just and reasonable in a naked and unadorned manner, while others, investing their ideas with an abundance of amplification, have sought to bewilder the people by burying the truth under a heap of fabulous inventions. But Moses, rejecting both of these methods, one as inconsiderate, careless, and unphilosophical, and the other as mendacious and full of trickery, made the beginning of his laws entirely beautiful and in all respects admirable, neither at once declaring what ought to be done or the contrary, nor, since it was necessary to mold beforehand the dispositions of those who were used to his laws, inventing fables himself, or adopting those which had been invented by others. And his exordium, as I have already said, is most admirable, embracing the creation of the world, under the idea that the law corresponds to the world and the world to the law, and that a man who is obedient to the law, being by doing so a citizen of the world, arranges his actions with reference to the intention of nature, in harmony with which the whole universal world is regulated. Accordingly, no one, whether poet or historian, could ever give expression in an adequate manner to the beauty of his ideas respecting the creation of the world, for they surpass all the power of language and amaze our hearing being too great and venerable to be adapted to the sense of any created being. That, however, is not a reason for our yielding to indolence on the subject, but rather from our affection for the deity, we ought to endeavor to exert ourselves even beyond our powers in describing them, not as having much or indeed anything to say of our own, but instead of much, just a little, such as it may be probable that human intellect may attain to when wholly occupied with a love of and desire for wisdom.
Can we go back a paragraph just a moment?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you
Read it again?
Can you scroll down a little bit?
Sure.
There's just a really beautiful sentence. Okay. The citizen of the world arranges his actions with reference to the intention of nature. Oh, that is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
To just stop and think about that for a moment and let it expand in your soul. The intention of nature is growth and creativity and abundance. And so while we are going through all of these lectures, we need to let those ideas just really bloom in us. No matter what kind of limits to growth they try to impose from the outside, we can be functioning according to the rules of nature, and we can be continuing to grow and produce abundance. I just could not let that sentence go by without saying something. It was beautiful.
Amen.
It's also Egyptian in origin. That whole concept is a Hermetic statement of their concept of natural law. No surprise coming from Philo of Alexandria either.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. At this point, I don't even say that a philosophical statement has an origin in any one particular part of the world, because you tend to find the common discovery of these universals emerge in various parts of the world. So it's hard for us in hindsight to go and say where it comes from. But it's true. You get this in the Egyptian matrix. You get this in India. You get this in China. You get this everywhere as a discovery.
There would certainly be threads. Yeah. There would be threads of it at least operating in the milieu that we're reading from now, the time period and the place. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, but it would be the concept of Maat, M-A-A-T, which is the concept of universal justice. But once again, I think that all civilizations arrive at the same universal laws. They would explain it by different words, and if Egypt has been chronologically before the others in the Mediterranean basin, I would say that it's not a so big surprise that Egypt would be quoted often as a source. But I would go back to the fact that the old civilization reached to the same conclusion with different words.
Yeah. I mean, the Egyptian one tends to permeate the West. I mean, you know, the Renaissance and everything like that. It just seems to be I don't know, it occupies a bigger space, if you like.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's appropriate.
It's appropriate in the sense that in the Western mythology, Egypt has a special place because she's very old. It's normal.
Yeah, and also we're dealing with Moses, right? So Moses studied and grew up in Egypt, was studied in
Egypt.
Exactly. He had
precisely.
Egyptian priests that influenced him. So of course, what you're saying is additionally important for this particular topic.
But it is really helpful to recognize that there is universal law. There is universal truth, because so much work has been done to fragment and separate the different cultures from each other. But when you realize that mankind seeking truth always eventually comes into the same truths, even if they say it in different terms, we all are hitting upon the same truths, and they are universal. They are in each culture.
Yeah, you're right, Susie, but I want to be the throne tonight. In each corner of the planet, you have civilization who have more prestige. And it's only normal that for the West, Egypt has a special place. And I think it's simply normal and psychologically healthy.
Mm.
Keep her going. Was it number 5 or 6?
I think I'm down to 7 already, or number 2,
Ooh.
actually.
No, 6, I think, at most. No?
6?
5.
Yeah.
5.
No, I did 5.
Okay.
I did 5.
Oh, yeah, love of wisdom, right, of course. Right.
Oh.
6.
Right. Yeah.
For as the smallest seal receives imitations of things of colossal magnitude when engraved upon it, so perchance in some instances the exceeding beauty of the description of the creation of the world, as recorded in the law, overshadowing with its brilliancy the souls of those who happen to meet with it, will be delivered to a more concise record after these facts have been first premised, which it would be improper to pass over in silence. For some men, admiring the world itself rather than the creator of the world, have represented it as existing without any maker and eternal, and as impiously as falsely have represented God as existing in a state of complete inactivity, while it would have been right, on the other hand, to marvel at the might of God as the creator and father of all, and to admire the world in a degree not exceeding the bounds of moderation.
Just to say, this is, for those who have read the Leibniz versus Clarke correspondence, in terms of like the nature of God, the passive tyrant versus the active, loving, creative, living God. This is it. It's all fantastic stuff. Sorry.
Oh. Okay. But Moses, who had early reached the very summits of philosophy, this is in accordance with the description of him in the Bible, where he is represented as being learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and who had learnt from the oracles of God the most numerous and important of the principles of nature, was well aware that it is indispensable that in all existing things there must be an active cause and a passive subject, and that the active cause is the intellect of the universe, thoroughly unadulterated, thoroughly unmixed, superior in virtue and superior in science, superior even to abstract good or abstract beauty, while the passive subject is something inanimate and incapable of motion by any intrinsic power of its own, but having been set in motion and fashioned and endowed with life by the intellect, became transformed into that most perfect work, this world. And those who describe it as being uncreated do, without being aware of it, cut off the most useful and necessary of all the qualities which tend to produce piety, namely providence. For reason proves that the Father and Creator has a care for that which has been created. For a father is anxious for the life of his children, and a workman aims at the duration of his works, and employs every device imaginable to ward off everything that is pernicious or injurious, and is desirous by every means in his power to provide everything which is useful or profitable for them. But with regard to that which has not been created, there is no feeling of interest as if it were his own in the breast of him who has not created it. Yeah. It is then a pernicious doctrine, and one for which no one should contend, to establish a system in this world such as anarchy is in a city, so that it should have no superintendent or regulator or judge by whom everything must be managed and governed. But the great Moses, thinking that a thing which has not been uncreated is as alien as possible from that which is visible before our eyes, for everything which is the subject of our senses exists in birth and in changes, and is not always in the same condition, has attributed eternity to that which is invisible and discerned only by our intellect as a kinsman and a brother, while of that which is the object of our external senses he has predicated generation as an appropriate description. Since then this world is visible and the object of our external senses, it follows of necessity that it must have been created, on which account it was not without a wise purpose that he recorded its creation, giving a very venerable account of God. And he says that the world was made in 6 days, not because the Creator stood in need of a length of time, for it is natural that God should do everything at once, not merely by uttering a command, but by even thinking of it, but because the things created required arrangement, and number is akin to arrangement. And of all numbers, 6 is, by the laws of nature, the most productive. For of all the numbers, from the unit upwards, it is the first perfect one, being made equal to its parts, and being made complete by them. The number 3 being half of it, and the number 2 a third of it, and the unit a sixth of it, and so to say, it is formed so as to be both male and female, and is made up of the power of both natures. For in existing things, the odd number is the male, and the even number is the female. Accordingly, of odd numbers, the first is the number 3, and of even numbers, the first is 2, and the 2 numbers multiplied together make 6. It was fitting, therefore, that the world, being the most perfect of created things, should be made according to the perfect number, namely 6, and, as it was to have in it the causes of both, which arise from combination, that it should be formed according to a mixed number, the first combination of odd and even numbers, since it was to embrace the character both of the female who sows the seed and of the female who receives it. And he allotted each of the 6 days to one of the portions of the whole, taking out the first day, which he does not even call the first day, that it may not be numbered with the others, but entitling it one, he names it rightly, perceiving in it and ascribing to it the nature and appellation of the limit. We must mention as much as we can of the matters contained in his account, since to enumerate them all is impossible, for he embraces that beautiful world which is perceptible only by the intellect, as the account of the first day will show.
Yeah, I'd just say one thing here. This type of language, for those who have read the Plato's Timaeus, is probably people are probably pretty comfortable with this type of language. For those who haven't read Plato's Timaeus, or the authentic Pythagorean thinkers, they're maybe not so comfortable with this language, and it might dance a little bit too much with numerology. And I think that the thing that you'll find with the genuine Pythagoreans and Platonists and people like Philo is that what they're doing is they're recognizing in nature, in the realm of what, again, the realm of change, the realm of becoming, where everything is in flux, that there are certain manys between the one and the infinite, right? Between the boundary conditions of one and infinite, there's manys, there's quantizations, right? And we discovered this scientifically. We know that there's like a certain limited amount of organs that we have, despite the fact that we're infinitely divisible, maybe, but despite that, there's like a limited amount of a very specific amount of organs. There's a specific amount of orbits of the planets. There's a specific quality that some of these orbits have that deal with the harmonic proportions that have been discovered in just recent centuries. Same thing for the orbital trajectories of electrons around a nucleus or anything of the sort. So what the difference is with somebody like a Philo is they're looking at, well, what is the reasonableness for such quantization to exist in the first place, right? Like, why do we have the 12 months? What's a reasonable reason? Versus the irrationalist, usually occultist numerologists, they will tend to say that the reason why something qualitatively is because of the number. They'll try to reduce the quality to quantity. versus somebody like this or like Pythagoras or Timaeus. They're always looking for what is the quality, giving reason for the quantity being the way it is and not some other way. So it's just a slight inversion of, it's like a slight difference in value, but it makes a different universe that you think you're living in. And it's the same thing for the dialectic materialists, right? Who impose this arbitrary rule that any quality that we see emerge in the world has to be explained away by some quantitative explanation as one of the fundamental rules, which screws up the mind. It fucks you up. So this, he's looking for, well, what are reasonable reasons for things being the way they are quantitatively? That's something just to keep in mind.
Yeah, I would like to add that even those who read the I Ching and the epistemological appendix of the I Ching, the Shu Yi, the 10 Winds, would not be surprised with that kind of language, because beyond quantization, there are some symbolic positions that are explained in the I Ching, and it's the same in the I Ching that odd numbers for the male, and even numbers are for the female. And because why? Because 3 is the absolute number of heaven, of yang, meaning the dynamic position, because there are at least 2 explanations. When you see things from a human perspective, you can see things from up, down, in front of you, at the back of you, at the left of you, or at the right of you. So it is a symbolic representation of the human consciousness at the center of the cosmos. That's 1. 2, if you look at heaven, you can look at the horizon, you can look at the zenith, or can you look at the nadir? So those numbers who are associated either with the yang or the dynamic or the heavenly dimensions, or with the earthly dimensions, meaning the even numbers, it's not for fun. There are some epistemological foundations in the choice of why the odd numbers are heavenly and the even numbers are earthly. And the other stuff that I want to mention, the 6th day of creations, maybe it's a little bit far-fetched for me, but the 6 layers of the mind in the epistemological journey. Okay, I cannot prevent myself to make that association, but it has to be explored, of course.
All right.
Can I suggest, when we're talking about numbers, I tend to, like, when they're talking about the number 6 and all these other numbers, maybe it might help if we think of, instead of numbers, like more like in frequency, like the number 1 as a frequency of 1, and then number 2 is like twice then 1 as a frequency. View it as a frequency, and and then once we get to, say, the number 6, you'll see that, like, if you draw it on like an oscilloscope, say, if you have frequency 1, frequency 2, all the way to frequency 6, you'll see that 1, 2, and 3 will chime with the number 6. So I don't know. I think there's something in that. I could probably go on and on, but.
Yeah, no, I think the beautiful thing is that this way of thinking, for the mind in motion, they will chew on it and get and grow and become more fruitful for the mind in motion. So you'll find all sorts of references of things you've worked on, frequency and harmony. Super, as I think we've all discovered, is one of the most fruitful ways of tempering our concepts of number and quantity, is having that higher idea of harmony and frequency that we've been working on with Kepler and other great thinkers, and geometry as well, right? The quantization of the, like, the sound of the square, the sound of the triangle, the pentagon, which we all worked on at different times to construct, to create, not knowing how to create it. Then we discovered how to create it, and then we could think about, well, what were the proportions on a string generated by a square or a pentagon or a triangle or a hexagon that would then create a certain sound as a frequency that would be pleasant to the soul, and that would be used by a Mozart or a Beethoven in their creations of wonderful pieces of music, right? So it's this sort of thing is, and I'm not even getting into the domain of light and frequency for color, but there's that too. So yeah, all that to say, keep the mind flexible when reading something like this, and we'll get something out of it.
I just wanted to ask, or just note the fact that Sunday is not mentioned, but they mentioned the first day, and they didn't even want to call it the first day. But I was thinking of the idea of the one and the many, where you have maybe the Sunday being the one and the six being the many. So just thought I'd mention that.
You're a poet.
Interesting.
No, but it's directly in relations with epistemology, because at the one you have the absolute freedom, and the more you advance in harmonic proportions, you you have more laws in those lower planes, and having more laws in those lower planes, you still are in harmonic proportions with the source, okay, with the absolute freedom, but there will be less freedom, because even if there is still a harmonic proportions with the origin. So I often say 1 to 6, but here I would have to reverse, okay? Because 6, if I take the hexagram, 6 is the highest epistemological development, but it's the first day, okay? Because you have the absolute freedom there. So it's a question of arbitrary numeration, okay? But the highest you are, the freer you are, and the more you go down to the different hypostasis of manifestation from the origin, there will be more laws, but the more laws you have, the less freedom you have compared to the origin of the first day.
You could have that described as level 6 you're talking about there, Quan, as ethereal perhaps. And from there, the descending down to 1 is into a more dense state.
Absolutely dense.
I mean, those are simple references for the same sort of thing, but they're, to my mind anyway, triggers, if you like, but a little bit easier to understand that way.
Yes, absolutely.
Okie dokie. Roman numeral 4. We must mention as much as we can of the matters contained. Did I read it? Yeah. As the account of the first day will show. For God, as apprehending beforehand, as a God must do, that there could not exist a good imitation without a good model, and that of the things perceptible to the external senses, nothing could be faultless, which wax not fashioned with reference to some archetypical idea conceived by the intellect, when he had determined to create this visible world, previously formed that one which is perceptible only by the intellect, in order that so using an incorporeal model formed as far as possible on the image of God, he might then make this corporeal world a younger likeness of the elder creation, which should embrace as many different genera perceptible to the external senses as the other world contains of those which are visible only to the intellect. Who wants me to read that paragraph again?
Maybe I do.
Simplify it down, Bruce. Just say, as above, so below.
All right, here we go. For God, as apprehending beforehand, as a God must do, that there could not exist a good imitation without a good model, and that of the things perceptible to the external senses, nothing could be faultless, which wax not fashioned with reference to some archetypal idea conceived by the intellect, when he had determined to create this visible world, previously formed that one which is perceptible only by the intellect, in order that, so using an incorporeal model formed as far as possible on the image of God, he might then make this corporeal world a younger likeness of the elder creation, which should embrace as many different genera perceptible to the external senses as the other world contains of those which are visible only to the intellect.
Yeah.
But that world which consists of ideas it were impious in any degree to attempt to describe or even to imagine. But how it was created, we shall know if we take for our guide a certain image of the things which exist among us. When any city is founded through the exceeding ambition of some king or leader who lays claim to absolute authority, and is at the same time a man of brilliant imagination, eager to display his good fortune, then it happens at times that some man coming up who, from his education, is skillful in architecture, and he, seeing the advantageous character and beauty of the situation, first of all sketches out in his own mind nearly all the parts of the city which is about to be completed: the temples, the gymnasia, the prytania, and markets, the harbor, the docks, the streets, the arrangement of the walls, the situations of the dwelling houses, and of the public and other buildings. Then, having received in his own mind, as on a waxen tablet, the form of each building, he carries in his heart the image of a city, perceptible as yet only by the intellect, the images of which he stirs up in memory, which is innate in him, and, still further, engraving them in his mind like a good workman, keeping his eyes fixed on his model, he begins to raise the city of stones and wood, making the corporeal substances to resemble each of the incorporeal ideas. Now, we must form a somewhat similar opinion of God, who, having determined to found a mighty state, first of all conceived its form in his mind, according to which form he made a world perceptible only by the intellect, and then completed one visible to the external senses, using the first one as a model. As therefore the city, when previously shadowed out in the mind of the man of architectural skill, had no external place, but was stamped solely in the mind of the workman, so in the same manner, neither can the world which existed in ideas have had any other local position, except the divine reason which made them. For what other place could there be for his powers, which should be able to receive and contain, I do not say all, but even any single one of them whatever in its simple form? And the power and faculty which could be capable of creating the world has for its origin that good which is founded on truth. For if anyone were desirous to investigate the cause on account of which this universe was created, I think he would come to no erroneous conclusion if he were to say, as one of the ancients did say, that the Father and Creator was good, on which account he did not grudge the substance a share of his own excellent nature, since it had nothing good of itself, but was able to become everything. For the substance was of itself destitute of arrangement, quality, of animation, of distinctive character, and full of all disorder and confusion. And it received a change and transformation to what is opposite to this condition, and most excellent, being invested with order, quality, animation, resemblance, identity, arrangement, harmony, and everything which belongs to the more excellent idea. And God, not being urged on by any prompter, for who else could there have been to prompt him, but guided by his own sole will, decided that it was fitting to benefit with unlimited and abundant favors a nature which, without the divine gift, was unable to itself to partake of any good thing. But he benefits it, not according to the greatness of his own graces, for they are illimitable and eternal, but according to the power of that which is benefited to receive his graces. For the capacity of that which is created to receive benefits does not correspond to the natural power of God to confer them, since his powers are infinitely greater. And the thing created, being not sufficiently powerful to receive all their greatness, would have sunk under it, if he had not measured his bounty, allotting to each in due proportion that which was poured upon it. And if anyone were to desire to use more undisguised terms, he would not call the world, which is perceptible only to the intellect, anything else but the reason of God, already occupied in the creation of the world. For neither is a city, while only perceptible to the intellect, anything else but the reason of the architect, who was already designing to build one perceptible to the external senses on the model of that which is so only to the intellect. This is the doctrine of Moses, not mine. Accordingly, he, when recording the creation of man, in words which follow, asserts expressly that he was made in the image of God, and if the image be a part of the image, then manifestly so is the entire form, namely the whole of this world perceptible by the external senses, which is a greater imitation of the divine image than the human form is. It is manifest also, like the archetypal seal, which we call that world which is perceptible only to the intellect, must itself be the archetypal model, the idea of ideas, the reason of God.
By the way, anybody who's ever to read Leibniz's monadology and have been confused, read this and then reread Leibniz's monadology, because that's it. That's Leibniz's monadology right there. People get very confused about it, but that's it.
Or maybe Kepler too. Okay, immaterial, non-localized harmonic proportion, and material and localized harmonic proportion.
Yeah, I mean they're all drinking from the same well.
I suppose. What a coincidence.
Moses says also, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, taking the beginning to be, not as some men think, that which is according to time, for before the world time had no existence, but was created either simultaneously with it or after it. For since time is the interval of the motion of the heavens, there could not have been any such thing as motion before there was anything which could be moved, but it follows of necessity that it received existence subsequently or simultaneously. It therefore follows also of necessity that time was created either at the same moment with the world or later than it, and to venture to assert that it is older than the world is absolutely inconsistent with philosophy. But if the beginning spoken of by Moses is not to be looked upon as spoken of according to time, then it may be natural to suppose that it is the beginning according to number that is indicated, so that in the beginning he created is equivalent to, first of all he created the heaven. For it is natural in reality that that should have been the first object created, being both the best of all created things and being also made of the purest substance, because it was destined to be the most holy abode of the visible gods who are perceptible by the external senses. For if the Creator had made everything at the same moment, still those things which were created in beauty would no less have had a regular arrangement. But there is no such thing as beauty in disorder. But order is a due consequence and connection of things precedent and subsequent, if not in the completion of a work, at all events in the intention of the maker. For it is owing to order that they become accurately defined and stationary and free from confusion. In the first place, therefore, from the model of the world, perceptible only by the intellect, the Creator made an incorporeal heaven and an invisible earth, and the form of air and of empty space, the former of which he called darkness, because the air is black by nature, and the other he called the abyss, for empty space is very deep and yawning with immense width. Then he created the incorporeal substance of water and of air, and above all he spread light, being the seventh thing made, and this again was incorporeal, and a model of the sun, perceptible only to intellect, and of all the light-giving stars, which are destined to stand together in heaven.
So you see how he's not saying like he created water, he created light, he created the abyss. It's that these are he created the incorporeal substance of water and of air and the incorporeal substance of light. which is different than the thing itself. Because it's like what is anything that we know that is in the physical material world that has a beginning and end and a limitation in space, if it doesn't have an archetype or something as the idea in its purest sense that defines its purpose in the material world. So he's starting from the standpoint of ideas in their purest of forms, unchangeable, and then goes down into the changeable.
This whole thing is reminding me of the Bible verse that says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen.
Yeah.
And in that place, faith is the same as that idea that's not yet manifest in the material world. This is cool.
Well, it is the cosmos, God's plan.
All this sounds pretty Pythagorean to me. Like all numbers and everything.
Yeah. Those ideas floated for a very long time before Philo, and he synthesized it.
Okay. And air and light he considered worthy of the preeminence. For the one he called the breath of God, because it is air, which is the most life-giving of things, and of life the causer is God. And the other he called light, because it is surpassingly beautiful. For that which is perceptible only by intellect is as far more brilliant and splendid than that which is seen, as I conceive. The sun is than darkness, or day than night, or the intellect than any other of the outward senses by which men judge, inasmuch as it is the guide of the entire soul, or the eyes than any other part of the body. And the invisible divine reason, perceptible only by intellect, he calls the image of God. And the image of this image is that light, perceptible only by the intellect, which is the image of the divine reason, which has explained its generation. And it is a star above the heavens, the source of those stars which are perceptible by the external senses. And if anyone were to call it universal light, it would not be very wrong, since it is from that the sun and the moon and all the other planets and fixed stars derive their due light, in proportion as each has power given to it, that unmingled and pure light being obscured when it begins to change, according to the change from that which is perceptible only by the intellect to that which is perceptible by the external senses. For none of those things which are perceptible to the external senses is pure. Moses is right also when he says that darkness was over the face of the abyss. For the air is in a manner spread above the empty space, since having mounted up, it entirely fills all that open and desolate and empty place, which reaches down to us from the regions below the moon. And after the shining forth of that light, perceptible only to the intellect, which existed before the sun, then its adversary darkness yielded, as God put a wall between them and separated them, well knowing their opposite characters, and the enmity existing between their natures. In order, therefore, that they might not war against one another from being continually brought in contact, so that war would prevail instead of peace, God, burning want of order into order, did not only separate light and darkness, but that also placed boundaries in the middle of the space between the two, by which he separated the extremities of each. For if they had approximated, they must have produced confusion, preparing for the contest for the supremacy with great and unextinguishable rivalry, if boundaries established between them had not separated them and prevented them from clashing together. And these boundaries are evening and morning, the one of which heralds in the good tidings that the sun is about to rise, gently dissipating the darkness, and evening comes on as the sun sets, receiving gently the collective approach of darkness. And these, morning and evening, must be placed in the class of incorporeal things, perceptible only by the intellect. For there is absolutely nothing in them which is perceptible by the external senses, but they are entirely ideas and measures and forms and seals, incorporeal as far as regards the generation of other bodies. But when light came, and darkness retreated and yielded to it, and boundaries were set in the space between the two, namely evening and morning, then of necessity the measure of time was immediately perfected, which also the Creator called day, and he called it not the first day, but one day. And it is spoken of thus on account of the single nature of the world, perceptible only by the intellect, which has a single nature. The incorporeal world then was already completed, having its seat in the divine reason, and the world, perceptible by the external senses, was made on the model of it, and the first portion of it, being also the most excellent of all made by the Creator, was the heaven, which he truly called the firmament, as being corporeal. For the body is by nature firm, inasmuch as it is divisible into three parts. And what other idea of solidity and of body can there be, except that it is something which may be measured in every direction? Therefore he, very naturally contrasting that which was perceptible to the external senses and corporeal with that which was perceptible only by the intellect and incorporeal, called this the firmament.
Excuse me. I wanted to bring up the question, I've seen it a few times, the question of the word seal, how it's being used in this text. And earlier, I think he mentioned something about wax or like receiving a print of something. But my question is he saying that the mind or the realm of ideas is the seal, and then in there it receives the imprint from a source? Maybe somebody can clarify.
I cannot guarantee to read the mind of Philo, but the mind of Plato, yes, because it's exactly the same metaphor that has been used by Plato in the Theaetetus.
Is that the one where he's talking about the different students who have souls likened to different types of wax, either too soft or too hard or in the balance? Is that the
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's about at the 2/3 of the Theaetetus.
Right.
And I would say that I would make the hypothesis that it would be the same metaphor that is used by Philo. And I think it's not far-fetched to say that Philo read a lot of Plato.
Yeah. The imprint in the wax is like our memory, I think.
That's another metaphor for memory too. And you're perfectly right, because in the Theaetetus, the idea of seal or of anything making an imprinting into the wax has been used as a metaphor for the making of memories, but it also has been used as the general idea of the domain of the noetic domain, meaning the domain of ideas, having an imprint in the phenomenal reality, meaning the space-time energy matter. I prefer to say that.
Like memory of the soul. Maybe you're referring to that.
Yes, but that's two different metaphors. Okay, you have the metaphors using the wax as a warehouse for memories. That's one metaphor, but the other metaphor is more encompassing. Okay, the more encompassing metaphor is that the wax is space-time energy matter, and that the seal is precisely God's plan. Okay, because let's not forget that in Philo's text, we are moving from God's plan, the cosmos, the immaterial and non-localized harmonic proportions, to use Klepper's expression, to something which is more material, the wax. Okay, so that first metaphor is more encompassing than the metaphor used for memorization.
So
And
you
we'll
just
never
said
know God's
something.
plan.
You just made it a bit confusing to me. I thought it was like the wax or the seal was in the realm of ideas, but when you say the wax, that's making it corporeal. Corporeal.
Yeah, but you can introduce the numbers of layers that you want, okay? Because if I use the image of the hexagram, the highest level of epistemological development would correspond to the highest incorporeal plan, okay? And the more you go down, the more you will have denser wax, okay? So the last layers of the space-time energy matter would be the denser wax, and the highest level would be the seal, okay? The seal being the design, okay? Because when you have a seal, you have an image on the seal that you will imprint on something that will receive that image. So the seal is the domain of the noetic domain, okay? The domain of creation and of ideas and of eidos, okay? In Greek, once again, I'm sorry, the timeless forms, okay? So if I would like to use another word for seal, it would be timeless forms, okay? And
Platonic forms.
Yes,
Platonic
exactly.
forms, yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly. Because once again, I would bet my life that Philo read a lot of Plato. Okay,
which is exactly why I call it the Platonic form. It fits well with the cultural setting of this reading.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a metaphor for the Platonic forms, or if you want to be general, of the timeless form.
Yeah, same thing.
Could you call that universal knowing?
If you want, I have no problem with your expression, but I hope you wouldn't forgive me to be a little bit biased to Plato, and I would keep the idea of eidos for timeless forms.
Okay.
It's also possible that the seal would be the realm of the inner being, right?
Absolutely, because let's not forget once again, okay, the cosmos as the absolute understanding of reality in the epistemological development correspond exactly to God's plan. Okay, we human beings are not God, of course, but since we are in the image of God, we can uplift ourselves to that level of understanding of God's plan, and there you have a perfect matching.
And then the inner being would basically be a template on a microscopic level of the macroscopic divine plan.
Absolutely.
As above, so below.
Microcosm and yes, exactly. Microcosm and macrocosm. Yeah. Absolutely. But here we are in a very sliding slope. We risk to go into gnosis.
Or submicroscopic.
Healthy gnosis, because there is a healthy gnosis. And let's not forget that Philo is the healthy gnosis.
Alrighty then.
37.
Amen. Immediately afterwards, he, with great propriety and entire correctness, called it the heaven, either because it was already the boundary. Philo means the Uranus was derived either from horos, a boundary, or from orahu, to see oratus visible. It was already the boundary of everything, or because it was the first of all visible things which was created. And after its second rising, he called the time day, referring the entire space and measure of a day to the heaven on account of its dignity and honor among the things perceptible to the external senses. And after this, as the whole body of water in existence was spread over all the earth and had penetrated through all its parts, as if it were a sponge which had imbibed moisture so that the earth was only swampy land and deep mud, both the elements of earth and water being mixed up and combined together like one confused mass into one undistinguishable and shapeless nature. God ordained that all the water which was salt and destined to be a cause of barrenness to seeds and trees should be gathered together, flowing forth out of all the holes of the entire earth. And he commanded dry land to appear, that liquid which had any sweetness in it being left in it to secure its durability. For this sweet liquid in due proportions is as a sort of glue for the different substances, preventing the earth from being utterly dried up, and so becoming unproductive and barren, and causing it, like a mother, to furnish not only one kind of nourishment, namely meat, but both sorts at once, so as to supply its offspring with both meat and drink. Wherefore he filled it with veins resembling breasts, which, being provided with openings, were designed to pour forth springs and rivers. And in the same way, he extended the invisible irrigations of dew, pervading every portion of arable and deep-soiled land, to contribute to the most liberal and plenteous supply of fruits. Having arranged these things, he gave them names, calling the day, land, and the water which separated from it he called sea. After this, he began to adorn the land, for he bade it bring forth grass and bear corn, producing every kind of herb, and plains clothed with verdure, and everything which was calculated to be fodder for cattle and food for men. Moreover, he commanded every kind of tree to spring up, omitting no kind, either of those which are wild or of those which are called cultivated. And simultaneously with their first production, he loaded them all with fruit, in a manner different from that which exists at present. For now the different fruits are produced in turn at different seasons, and not all together at one time. For who is there who does not know that first of all comes the sowing and the planting, and in the second place, the growth of what has been sown and planted, and in some cases the plants extending their roots downwards like foundations, and in others raising themselves upwards to a height and displaying long stalks. After that come the buds, and the putting forth of leaves, and then after everything else comes the production of fruit. And again, the fruit, when first produced, is not perfect, but it contains in itself all kinds of change, with reference both to its quantity in regard of magnitude and to its qualities in its multiform appearance. For the fruits is produced at first like indivisible grains, which are hardly visible from their diminutive size, and which one might correctly enough pronounce to be the first things perceptible by the external senses. And afterwards, by little and little, from the nourishment conveyed in channels, which waters the tree, and from the wholesome effect of the breezes, which blow air at the same time cold and gentle, the fruit is gradually vivified and nursed up and increased, advancing onward to its perfect size. And with its change of magnitude, it changes also its qualities, as if it were diversified with varying colors by pictorial science. But in the first creation of the universe, as I have said already, God produced the whole race of trees out of the earth in full perfection, having their fruit not incomplete, but in a state of entire ripeness, to be ready for the immediate and undelayed use and enjoyment of the animals which were about immediately to be born. Accordingly, he commanded the earth to produce these things, and the earth, as though it had for a long time been pregnant and travailing, produced every sort of seed and every sort of tree, and also of fruit in unspeakable abundance. And not only were these produced fruits to be food for living animals, but enough also to serve as a preparation for the continuous production of similar fruits hereafter, covering substances consisting of seed, in which are the principles of all plants, and undistinguishable and invisible, but destined hereafter to become manifest and visible in the periodical maturity of the fruit. For God thought fit to imbue nature with a long duration, making the races that he was creating immortal and giving them a participation in eternity. On which account he led on and hastened the beginnings toward the end, and caused the end to turn backwards to the beginning. For from plants come fruit, as the end might come from the beginning. And from the fruit comes the seed, which again contains the plant within itself, so that a fresh beginning may come from the end. And on the fourth day, after he had embellished the earth, he diversified and adorned the heaven, not giving the precedence to the inferior nature by arranging the heaven subsequently to the earth, or thinking that which was the more excellent and the more divine worthy only of the second place, but acting thus for the more manifest demonstration of the power of his dominion. For he foreknew with respect to men who were not yet born what sort of beings they would be as to their opinions, forming conjectures on what was likely and probable, of which the greater part would be reasonable, though falling short of the character of unadulterated truth, and trusting that rather to visible phenomena than to God, and admiring sophistry rather than wisdom. And again, he knew that surveying the periods of the sun and moon, to which are owing the summers and winters, and the alternations of spring and autumn, they would conceive the revolutions of the stars in heaven to be the causes of all things which every year should be produced and generated on the earth. Accordingly, that no one might venture either through shameless impudence or inordinate ignorance to attribute to any created thing the primary causes of things, he said, let them run over in their minds the first creation of the universe, when, before the sun or the moon existed, the earth brought forth all kinds of plants and all kinds of fruits. And seeing this in their minds, let them hope that it will again bring forth such, according to the appointment of the Father, when it shall seem good to him, without his having need of the aid of any of the sons of men beneath the heavens, to whom he has given powers, though not absolute ones. For as a charioteer holding the reins, or a helmsman with his hand upon the rudder, he guides everything as he pleases, in accordance with law and justice, needing no one else as his assistant, for all things are possible to God. This is the cause why the earth bore fruit and herbs before God proceeded to adorn the heaven. And next the heaven was embellished in the perfect number 4. And if anyone were to pronounce this number the origin and source of the all-perfect decade, he would not err. For what the decade is in actuality, that the number 4, as it seems, is in potentiality, at all events, if the numerals from the unit to 4, by addition, that is 1, 2, 3 plus 4, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equal 10, are placed together in order, they will make 10, which is the limit of the number of immensity, around which the numbers wheel and turn as around a goal.
Decimal system.
Cool. Moreover, the number 4 also comprehends the principles of the harmonious concords in music, that in fours and in fifths, and the diapason, and besides this, the double diapason, from which sounds the most perfect system of harmony is produced. For the ratio of the sounds in fourths is as 4 to 3, and in fifths as 3 to 2. And in the diapason, that ratio is doubled. And in the double diapason, it is increased fourfold, all which ratios the number 4 comprehends. At all events, the first, or the epistratus, is the ratio of 4 to 3. The second, or the hemialius, is that of 3 to 2. The twofold ratio is that of 2 to 1, or 4 to 2. And the fourfold ratio is that of 4 to 1. There is also another power of the number 4, which is a most wonderful one to speak of and to contemplate. For it was this number that first displayed the nature of the solid cube, the numbers before 4 being assigned only to incorporeal things. For it is according to the unit that the thing is reckoned which is spoken of in geometry as a point, and a line is spoken of according to the number 2, because it is arranged by nature from a point, and a line is length without breadth. And when breadth is added to it, it becomes a superficies, which is arranged according to the number 3. And a superficies, when compared with the nature of a solid cube, wants one thing, namely depth. And when this one thing is added to the 3, it becomes 4. On which account it has happened that this number is a thing of great importance, inasmuch as from an incorporeal substance perceptible only by intellect, it has led us on to a comprehension of a body divisible in a threefold manner, and which by its own nature is first perceived by the external senses. And he who does not comprehend what is here said may learn to understand it from a game which is very common. Those who play with nuts are accustomed, when they have placed 3 nuts on the floor, to place one more on top of them, producing a figure like a pyramid. Accordingly, the triangle stands on the floor, arranged up to the number 3, and the nut which is placed upon it makes up 4 in number, and in figure it produces a pyramid, which is now a solid body. And in addition to this, there is that point also of which we should not be ignorant. The number 4 is the first number which is a square, being equal on all sides, the measure of justice and equality. And that is the only number, the nature of which is such that it is produced by the same numbers, whether in combination or in power. In combination, when 2 and 2 are added together, and again in power when we speak of twice 2. Thus 2 plus 2 equals 4, 2 times 2 equals 4. And in this is displays, something like that, an exceedingly beautiful kind of harmony, which is not the lot of any other number. If we examine the number 6, which is composed of 2 3s, if these 2 numbers are multiplied, it is not the number 6 that is produced, but a different one, the number 9. And the number 4 has many other powers also, which we must subsequently show more accurately in a separate essay appropriated to it. At present, it is sufficient to add this, that it was the foundation of the creation of the whole heaven and the whole world. For the 4 elements, out of which this universe was made, flowed from the number 4 as from a fountain. And in addition to the 4 elements, the seasons of the year are also 4, which are the causes of the generation of animals and plants, the year being divided into the quadruple division of winter and spring and summer and autumn. The aforesaid number, therefore, being accounted worthy of such preeminence in nature, the Creator of necessity adorned the heaven by the number 4, namely by that most beautiful and excellent godlike ornament, the light-giving stars. And knowing that of all existing things, light is the most excellent, he made it the instrument of the best of all the senses, sight. For what the mind is in the soul, that the eye is in the body. For each of them sees, the one beholding those existing things which are perceptible only to the intellect, and the other those which are perceptible to the external senses. But the mind is in need of knowledge in order to distinguish incorporeal things, and the eyes have need of light in order to be able to perceive bodies. And light is also the cause of many other good things to men, and particularly of the greatest, namely philosophy. For the sight, being sent upwards by light, and beholding the nature of the stars and their harmonious movement, and the well-ordered revolutions of the fixed stars and of the planets, some always revolving in the same manner and coming to the same places, and others having double periods in an anomalous and somewhat contrary manner, beholding also their harmonious dances of all these bodies arranged according to the laws of perfect music causes an ineffable joy and delight to the soul. And the soul, feasting on a continuous series of spectacles, for one succeeds another, has an insatiable love for beholding such. Then, as is usually the case, it examines with increased curiosity what is the substance of these things which are visible, and whether they have an existence without having been created, or whether they receive their origin by creation, and what is the character of their movement, and what the causes are by which everything is regulated. And it is from inquiries into these things that philosophy has arisen, than which no more perfect good has entered into human life. But the Creator, having a regard to that idea of light perceptible only by the intellect, which has been spoken of in the mention made of the incorporeal world, created those stars which are perceptible by the external senses, those divine and superlatively beautiful images, which on many accounts he placed in the purest temple of corporeal substance, namely in heaven. One of the reasons for his so doing was that they might give light. Another was that they might be signs. Another had reference to their dividing the times of the seasons of the year, and above all, dividing days and nights, of months and years, which are the measures of time, and which have given rise to the nature of number. And how great is the use, and how great the advantage derivable from each of these aforesaid things, is plain from their effect. But with a view to a more accurate comprehension of them, it may perhaps not be out of place to trace out the truth in a regular discussion. Now the whole of time, being divided into two portions, day and night, the sovereignty of the day the Father has assigned to the Son as a mighty monarch, and that of the night he has given to the moon, and to the multitude of the other stars. And the greatness of the power and sovereignty of the Son has its most conspicuous proof in what has already been said. For he, being one and single, has been allotted for his own share and by himself 1/2 portion of all time, namely day. And all the other lights in conjunction with the moon have the other portion, which is called night. And when the sun rises, all the appearances of such number of stars are not only obscured, but absolutely disappear from the effusion of his beams. And when he sets, then they all assemble together, begin to display their own peculiar brilliancy and their separate qualities. And they have been created, as Moses tells us, not only that they might send light upon the earth, but also that they might display signs of future events. For either by their risings, or their settings, or their eclipses, or again by their appearances and occultations, or by the other variations observable in their motions, men oftentimes conjecture what is about to happen. The productiveness or unproductiveness of the crops, the birth or loss of their cattle, fine weather or cloudy weather, calm and violent storms of wind, floods in the rivers or droughts, a tranquil state of the sea and heavy waves, unusual changes in the seasons of the year when either the summer is cold like winter or the winter warm, or when the spring assumes the temperature of autumn or the autumn that of spring. And before now, some men have conjecturally predicted disturbances and commotions of the earth from the revolutions of the heavenly bodies, and innumerable other events which have turned out most exactly true. So that it is a most veracious saying that the stars were created to act as signs, and moreover to mark the seasons. And by the word seasons, the divisions of the year are here intended. And why may not this be reasonably affirmed? For what other idea of opportunity can there be except that it is the time for success? And the and the seasons bring everything to perfection and set everything right, giving perfection to the sowing and planting of fruits, and to the birth and growth of animals.
just wanted to note one thing, since many of us here have read Kepler's book 4, on his metaphysics, and he spends quite a bit of time in that book, if people recall, going through his intervention on the superstitious nature of astrology, right, and the prediction of the future based on the configuration of the planets, which was behind a lot of the decisions to go to war of the 30 Years' War, that he was writing this within that context. And he was introducing a healthy scientific approach to saying, yes, it's true that there is a lot that the configuration of the planets can tell us about the future. But he makes a point that we have free will, that nothing in the human domain is defined specifically by the heavens, and he does a lot of polemics and wonderful things, but he goes through the things that you can know in terms of the weather patterns, right? He introduces like an astroclimatology, which I think is the earliest astroclimatology that was ever codified, and a variety of other things in terms of earthquakes and what have you. So the fact that Philo is also sort of doing something similar in a world that's very superstitious, astrology is very heavy in the Roman world that he's writing this in, but nowhere does he specifically say human affairs, right? That our fate is also shaped entirely by the disposition of the planets. But he's saying, yeah, it's true, we can know the future, but it's a little bit more grounded, which I appreciate.
I can make a comparison here, if you like, Matthew, just
Yeah.
historical astrology. For the most part, in ancient times, we're talking about the astrology of nations and of kings. Most of the readings were essentially more important ones, if you like, were more important. Were more based around aggregate behavior rather than individual behavior. That was what astrology was primarily used for, or that was the methodology. Horary astrology as opposed to natal astrology. And I equate it now with the sort of thing that's happened over social media, the last 10 years, and the aggregation of information and what it's being used for, what it could potentially be used for, but certainly what it's being used for in terms of surveillance and a whole lot of other things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Do we want to? I'm looking at the. It's 9:30 now. We're on page 9 of 28, so we're 1/3 of the way through. Might be, numerologically speaking, a decent place to perhaps stop and shift gears into just philosophical chit chat. What do you guys want to read on, or do you want to stop? Is it okay if people stop here with the reading?
Yeah, either way works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All
Can I
right.
ask some basic questions, Matt?
Oh, dude, yeah. Of course.
So, like, I'm trying to situate the time of his life relative to Jesus, and maybe we can start with that.
Yeah. Well, he was born in 20 BCE and he died in 50 CE.
So
More or
20
less.
years before?
Yeah,
He's
more or less.
older than
more.
He's older 20 years.
He died when, Quan?
50 C. 50 C. He died at 50 C, so 20 years after Jesus Christ.
20 years
So he's
after.
20 years older.
Yes, and he died. Yeah, right. He's 20 years older and he died 20 years after.
I also have a question.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on, Kelly, because I feel like Luke had a follow-up question. I get a sense of.
Okay.
Yeah. I just want to say that according to Matthew, not this Matthew, but the Matthew in the Gospel, Jesus was born in 6 BCE, so he was born 6 years before his birth. And according to Luke, he was born in 4 CE. So it's just a funny thing that I want to add.
I didn't know that. Okay.
But it doesn't matter. It's just 10 years of margin.
Because as we were reading earlier, I was thinking, I never really found out a lot about the 3 wise men that were there, apparently present when Jesus was born, as the story goes. So it would have been cool if he would have been one of the person present.
I would like to interrupt you here. the hypothesis for the birth of Jesus Christ in 4 years after his own birth in 4 CE is quite strong, okay, because the governor of Syria, Quirinius, ordered a census, okay, and it was the only census in the Levant at that time that has been given in 4 CE. So probably, I would say that here is a small historical detail, but I would say that Jesus was probably born in 4 CE, which is quite paradoxical, and it's an amusing thing to say.
So yes, 4 years later than the claimed date?
Yes, the claim by the official computation, if you want, okay? Because that argument is quite strong, okay? The census ordered by Quirinius happened in 4 CE, and that's for sure.
Do you think that it was just incompetence that we've been holding on to another date, or is there a reason for it in your mind? What do you think?
Frankly, I think that probably some computation that has been done by the bishop in the beginning suffer from some mistake, or they were not aware of the exact year of the census by Quirinius, governor of Syria. So any institutions has a tendency to be a little bit to have a certain institutional inertia. So I would not make a big deal about that.
But could it be that it's because we changed the calendar throughout the years, and that's could have contributed to the offset?
No, because the Gregorian calendar that has been invented in the 16th century, we could have made some adjustment very easily. It's not a big deal.
Okay. Well, did you have a follow-up?
More likely a bureaucratic mistake, as Juan says, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
We've surely all dealt with bureaucracies at a high level or a low level, and we know with the you know, right now particularly, they're very much prone to mistakes.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's fine.
Exactly.
All right, I wouldn't.
Well, perhaps there's one thing I would just finish with. One thing is like there's always a continuity when we're studying a certain method of investigation of science and history, and I was trying to find a link, and there is a link. They their lives cross paths a bit later, I think, and maybe you can just explain it, touch on that.
Who Jesus and Philo?
Yes.
That's complicated, okay, because there are many studies about the young age of Jesus and when he was a young man of 20s. Because once again, there are speculations that he went to Egypt to study, and there are also the possibility that he went to the Decapolis, okay, because you know that just east of Galilee, there is a zone called Decapolis, and you have 10 Greek cities with a lot of Greek philosophers and Greek scientists. And it is not far-fetched to imagine that Jesus got an excellent education by the Greek philosopher living in the zone called Decapolis, and which is only 50 kilometers east of Galilee. And let's not forget that Egypt, the companion of Alexander who ruled Egypt first after his death, was not Ptolemy, okay? But was the guy Seleucus, the guy who created the Seleucid Empire.
That's right.
And the Seleucus got Palestine in the second after Ptolemy. And so let's not forget that there was a lot of interaction between Egypt and Palestine at first because of the conquest by Alexander. So it's not a big deal to think that those people from Palestine kept some relation with Egypt in terms of philosophy, in terms of science, notwithstanding the Decapolis zone, just 50 kilometers east of Galilee. Okay, so Palestine at the time was a very cosmopolitan region, and was not at all outside the mainstream understanding of philosophy and of science.
Well, because I was also confused because I had quickly read the invitation by Matt, and he mentions Peter, and Peter would have worked with Philo,
Yeah.
the rabbi. So was Peter some? Pardon me, my ignorance, but was Peter somebody who lived a contemporary of Jesus? Yes, right.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
he was one of the
Yeah.
apostles. Yes.
So he's not one of the other ones who never met Jesus.
You're
So,
speaking of Paul. You're speaking of Paul, probably. So,
well, there's other ones I think that
uh,
haven't met
There's
Jesus.
Luke. There's a Luke as well who wrote the
Yeah.
Acts, who would not have necessarily met Jesus. But no, Peter definitely was. He was the one who Jesus said, "You will be my rock," or "You will, you are the rock upon
Right.
which my church will be
Yeah.
built." Yeah, so he
So there
definitely.
is a clear continuity then. I mean, we've established Peter, Jesus, and Philo.
Yeah.
And
How do
if
we know?
and
How do we know that Peter knew Philo?
Eusebius, the early church father, who I think is the best source that we have, who lived about a century after Peter died, but had access to a variety of documents that have been lost in the sands of time. And I think he's the most competent historian that we know of, who's really like an authentic Platonic scholar as well. There's a few other people who wrote around this period as well, but then I've noticed that in looking into it, a lot of modern, usually Oxford, Cambridge connected scholars are like frothing at the mouth, trying really hard to deny this. Like they go overboard trying to deny the claims of Eusebius that Peter and Philo work together because they're all they're trying to create a narrative that we all get sucked into that denies any possibility of a universal fight between that would have occurred between allies of different faiths, since the idea is to get us into a divide to conquer sort of worldview where we look at other faiths as being something we have to only relate to from the standpoint of tolerance or go to war with, like a clash of civilizations. But the idea that there's a universal attribute uniting us all, that's really like foreboding.
And Eusebius, he's like a historical writer or one of the church
yeah,
writers.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Can you put his name
Matthew,
in the chat?
a quick question that relates here. Are you aware of anything that historian Josephus wrote that connects the two?
The two?
No.
No.
Yeah, okay. Because I
No.
mean, he would be the go-to historian from that period by the academy.
Yeah, he would have
Yeah.
lived over the time of Jesus's lifespan, but no, I don't know of anything directly.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
but I would like to say that he's not a reliable sources because he used the history or the how can I say it the narrative of the Messiah, and for him because he was arrested by Emperor Vespasian after the siege of Jerusalem in the year 70, or maybe even he was arrested in year 69. Because he was one of the leaders of the zealots. Okay, he was from an aristocratic family, but he was one of the leaders of the zealots at the beginning. And since Vespasian arrested him, he managed to save his life by spinning some mumbo jumbo that the Messiah is not a Jewish Messiah, but is the Emperor Vespasian himself, who was not emperor at that moment, but was the general sent by Emperor Nero to conquer the Jew or to stop the rebellion. So, of course, Vespasian was delighted by that the prediction, and it gave him confidence to usurp the throne of Rome. So, Joseph first, because his sold out is not very reliable as a source.
Good point.
Well aware of Josephus's history, mate.
Huh? What did
I'm
you
well
say?
aware of Josephus's history.
Oh,
I was
okay.
just curious whether there was any possible reference to, as I said, the meeting of Peter and Philo and Jesus, etc.
But my dear Paul, if you know his history, you know
Yeah, he
perfectly that
wouldn't have written about it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your logic, Paul.
Yeah. You get a lot of conspiracy theories around Josephus, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, one of which suggests that he is in fact Paul.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a lot out there on Josephus. He would not be what I would call a trustworthy historian. There's agendas everywhere when you read about him.
Yeah, but I don't want to bring us into too complicated historical enigmas. But there is not a conspiracy theory, but a hypothesis that Paul is a member of the royal house of the Herodians. And it's not impossible. I mean, there were a lot of aristocrats around Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Nicodemus was a Jewish aristocrat, for example.
Sure. Oh yeah, Nicodemus. Monty?
Yes, couple observations. This brought to mind insofar as what Philo was referring to is in the beginning with darkness divided from a light and so forth. Without getting too deep into interpretation of it, I would observe that in the book of Genesis, it refers to the evening and the morning being the first day. Where in popular culture, we tend to think of light as, at dawn as being the first day, but actually there's darkness. And in further reference to that, I would refer also to the book of Genesis he was referring to, where it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. And the earth was out form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And then it further goes on to say, and then the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. In other words, then there was movement upon the face of the waters, and then there was light thereafter. And then after that cycle is when the dry land appeared, in other words, formed. And thereafter, the firmament appeared in the heavens thereafter. So you might look at this, what I think is important here is the progression of a natural cycle, beginning with darkness, or beginning with the face of the waters, which is truth. And then error might be referred to as the spirit moving upon the face of the darkness. And then there was light thereafter. And in popular culture, you're not going to find this in a Bible class, but in popular culture, I think we attempt to, in the materialistic universe, the materialistic world, they tend to turn everything around where everyone wants, rather than water, air, earth, and fire, which is love, they tend to turn it around, and we want love or emotional capacities to move us and to create forms based on that, and then attempt to justify it thereafter. So just an observation, I think it's worthwhile of consideration given this thing with light and darkness and the progression of these cycles. In other words, an ordering principle to creation.
Yeah, thanks, man. That's a good point.
Yeah. And the sequence of King 1 in the I Ching is using the same elements of fire, water, etc., to symbolize those kinds of eidetic manifestation before it manifests in space-time energy matter.
I got a quick question. Is our Philo mentioned at all in the Gospels or in the other books of the New Testament?
Nope.
Thank you.
No, I don't know. I'd like to know where. I mean, there's a lot of underappreciated literature from these early days of the early church, the first couple of generations. I think you have Irenaeus of Leon, who was a disciple of John, who did write about him. There's quite a few that were pre-Nicene church fathers, and they're just incredible scholars. It's beautiful to read, and some of the the ideological hangups that sort of, I think, contaminate some of the, or lessen some of the potential goodness within the church tend to come centuries after these figures. I like Origen, for example, is one of the leading figures of the early church in like the early 2nd century. Origen is just like the leader of the Library of Alexandria, such a powerful intellect. And he really took issue with this idea of original sin. He saw it as a big Achilles heel that should be dealt with very, very carefully and not simply assume that we're all just intrinsically sinners at birth, but that it's the act of our free will choosing the worse when we know the better. But that, you know, he was iced out, or his doctrines and thoughts were iced out in the later institutions when Rome incorporated a lot of the Christian theology into its own thing, you know?
Yeah.
My understanding is that that problem that you just mentioned is the reason that you have an Eastern Church and a Western Church. That is the essential debate at the heart of the schism.
It's a can of worms. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. But before going to the schism, I think that we have to remember that at the origin, you have 4 schools of theology who were prestigious, and the 2 schools who were close to Palestine were the school of Alexandria and the school of Antioch, okay, which is now in Syria. And after that, the 2 schools who managed theologically to be embodied into powerful churches were not the school from the origin of Alexandria and Antioch, but rather the 2 schools from Constantinople. I was going to say Istanbul, but Constantinople is the right way to say it in this context, and the one of Rome. Okay, so it's possible that the theological school of Rome and of Constantinople would not be interested for political reasons to put forward certain past collaboration, where the school of Alexandria, where Philo was living, was more the source at the origin. Okay, after all, geographically, Alexandria and Antioch were much, much more closer to Jerusalem than Constantinople and Rome.
Good point. Really good point.
I think you'd have to throw in Plotinus as well.
Oh yeah. Well, he came way well. What year did he live in? I thought he was much later.
I'm thinking roughly 300.
Yeah, but it's the same time that Eusebius.
Eusebius
died in 330. Yeah, Eusebius died in 339.
Yeah, you're right. No, Plotinus is actually before Eusebius, so he died in 270. Good point.
Yeah. And then you had his disciple Porphyry.
Yeah.
So that would have been closer to Rome. He was embedded in Rome as the sort of preeminent Western Platonist.
Never read
his Aeneids are not easygoing.
Oh no, you read them?
I've tried to read them. Let's put it that way, Matt.
I hear you. Interesting. I'm gonna have to dip in and check them out.
Oh, definitely. Have a little something to drink before you settle down for the evening.
Yeah, but I would promote Plotinus and Porphyry for future readings, because those are the source of healthy gnosis.
Yes. He was considered, just on a human level, a very fine, ethical human being. Embodied the do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Cool.
Commandment.
Yeah, that's important. And he was a Christian.
He was. I don't know that he was a Christian.
But he's a Neoplatonist.
His teacher. Yes, he was a Neoplatonist, but his teacher, I'm thinking, came from Greece, and I've forgotten his name. But if you look under Plotinus, you're going to see his teacher, who we don't hear of him much, but he was known as, in a sense, far greater than Plotinus, but he didn't want to be known. You can look. I would have to go
Ammonia
to
succus.
the.
Exactly.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, he was I think degrees even beyond Plotinus.
Okay. Huh. Interesting. The reading list is getting bigger and bigger.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Boy, when you venture into the realm of Neoplatonism, you're jumping into the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sharks in that ocean. You gotta
Yes, indeed.
I can add in Euclid's Book of Elements. The beginning chapter, it's almost like a parallel with the Bible, where it's kind of laid out almost like the way Genesis laid out. Like in the beginning, Euclid, he defines the point and the line, and the square and all that, and then he just goes on and on. But it's kind of laid out almost like chapter 1 verse 3, stuff like that. I find a parallel.
Well,
Great stuff.
yeah. Well,
Just happened to have it here.
just happen to have your Euclid lying around your house. Hey, look at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a copy too. I just don't have it handy.
Well, Kepler.
Reading list just grew again.
Well, in Kepler's volume 3 and 4 of his Harmonies, he cites he makes good use of a commentator of Euclid who he likes much more than even Euclid, but somebody who did sort of what Philo is doing to the books of Moses. This particular Pythagorean Platonist whose name is all of a sudden escaping me. Maybe Quan can help me, or Luke. Who was writing during the time of the Roman Empire and who did the commentaries on Euclid. What's his name? Oh, gosh, it'll come later, I guess. And he sort of does an inversion of Euclid. Instead of beginning from the line or the point, and then the line, and then the surface, and then the solid, the way Euclid does, by saying like the first thing that exists is a point which has no width, breadth, or height, and then when you add points together, they get a line, and then that's the next stage of reality of the mind moving into reality, and then you add which has breadth and height but no width, and then you add a bunch of those together, and then you get the line, and then you add the surface, and then you add the surfaces, you get a solid. It sort of has you in a bit of a mental bind, right? Like you see there's an Achilles heel or a Trojan horse built into that way of constructing reality, or your idea of reality, because then your concept of what volumes are become made up of a bunch of like lines or surfaces, which are made up of a bunch of lines, which are made up of a bunch of points, but the points are a bunch of nothings, which have zero width, breadth, or height. So basically, you're starting to look at reality as if it's a composite of a bunch of nothings. Whereas in this commentator on Euclid, he starts from Euclid's last book on the 5 Platonic solids and starts building a top-down construction of the universe from the solids first, and then goes down to the particulars, which Kepler likes.
Oh, sorry. Were you thinking of Proclus?
Proclus, thank you, Proclus, exactly.
But I'm not sure. Maybe I would hypothesize Theon of Alexandria, who was the famous female mathematicians from Alexandria, Hypatia. Because Theon of Alexandria is 1 or 2 generations before Proclus, and he had the same idea of going first into 3D realities and ending with the dot, which is more an imaginary object. But anyway, that kind of thing, you can have many people having thought to the same thing, and maybe Proclus got the acknowledgement, and that's all.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I didn't know that Hypatia's works, were they preserved? Do we have her writings?
Yeah, some, and even some of papers from her father, Theon of Alexandria, who was himself a very distinguished mathematician.
Sorry, I won't be able to bring dinner tonight.
Okay, well, still we can arrange it.
Matt, I got a question for you. Comparing what you just described about a point being even something that's not real, eventually creating what we consider real through lines and surfaces and then solids. What do you make of comparing that with the quote by the quantum physicist Niels Bohr, who said something like, quantum physics shows us that what we consider real is made of things that we cannot consider to be real. Is there some comparison? Is there something, that the philosophers deduced something that eventually quantum physicists have found?
Well, I guess the thing about that particular one, it's very similar in my mind. That in the Niels Bohr construction and model of the atom, there's a lot of assumptions are imbued into their model around which, like, there's an idea that there's empty space between electrons in orbitals around a nucleus. So you have these big assumptions that emptiness makes up most of the atom, and that we're made of atoms, but we're mostly empty. The thing about Niels Bohr is that he doesn't seem to have really discovered any principles in his life. He made models that had a practical utility, mechanically speaking, to get certain results, using probabilistic statistical, metrics, like where, we'll use statistical probability theory, and that it has a usefulness, as does, Oppenheimer, who worked with him, and Wolfgang Pauli and Heisenberg. Like, that whole Copenhagen school were all using the same assumptions, but they didn't discover things. They were making models that had certain limited mechanical effects, which were useful. But the assumptions, I think that they allowed in a lot of Trojan horses into their worldview, their broader cosmology, which people like Max Planck and Einstein and Madame Curie took deep issue with, who were the people who were the previous generation, the old guard of scientists who were the ones making discoveries. So they all saw that there was something really dangerous entering into the scientific zeitgeist with this new generation of mathematician, and a certain nihilistic philosophical perspective that was imbued within their scientific language that they were putting in there, and that was derailing what they saw as being like an organic flow, a creative evolution of science and discovery that was being derailed into this new box. So yeah, I think that there's something similar, as you just correctly, I think, observed, between the type of Trojan horses that were infused into like, a lot of what Euclid is saying is mechanically correct. It's useful, but there's something bad entering into it if you fully use the method that's promoted for the mind to abide by in scientific research.
I'm ignorant about what you just described about the Copenhageners there, nihilistic and otherwise, and I'm trying to zero in on what I understand about quantum physics, that atoms and their parts are not always parts or particles. It's that uncertainty of, is it a wave or is it a particle? And I think that's what I'm inferring he means by saying they are things that can't be considered real.
Well, I do know. Oh yeah, Quan might have something to say about this, but I'll just say one last thing about this. I know that that Niels Bohr did make very explicit that he took offense with the idea that there was such a thing as ontological truth or causation. He denied its possibility outright. So he built a system, and there's direct citations from his own hand, denying the existence of ontological truth. So he built a system based on a negation of the possibility of truth. And so from there, you could see a lot can be infused that could be quite, that could derail a truth-loving mind if you hold that as core assumption under your matrix. So yeah, Quan, I would just, leave it to you. What thoughts do you have on that?
Okay, first I would like to introduce a very fundamental philosophical distinction. Okay, when in mathematics we can play with the idea of an imaginary dot, we cannot play with the idea of an imaginary stuff in space-time energy matter. Okay, because you bring something that is from the noetic reality or the space of the ideas to space-time energy matter, and it's not correct, because space-time energy matter, you have to be capable to give facts, okay, measure. Second thing, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo around the idea of the principle of uncertainty, okay, but because the principle of uncertainty is not philosophical. It is simply the fact that when you measure a certain stuff, the result will be within a certain standard deviation. Okay, it's not uncertainty. It's simply that the result is within some boundaries, and those boundaries are defined by something technical called standard deviation. Okay, like the marks that you have in the school for some children, for example. Okay, so it's the same for the behavior of the electron. And third, because you remember that the board worked a lot with Heisenberg, okay, and one of the major contribution to the modern quantum mechanics is the Heisenberg equation, okay, and the Heisenberg equation is simply the whole energy of the system as the summation of the potential energy and of the kinetic energy of the whole system. Okay, so once again, it's mathematics. It's not a description of reality, and those mathematics that I'm far to master are very powerful. Okay, and the problem is the mentality that has been introduced into the mind of the young physicians since maybe the last 75 years. So just understand the mathematical equation because they work, and they truly work, and just forget the representation of reality. So it is the last maybe not three, but two generations, not three generations, from Bohr and Heisenberg is three generations. The last three generations just relinquish the uplifting to the understanding of God's plan. And just because, let's not forget, okay, mathematical domain is I'm sorry, but with my obsession with the hexagram, okay, but it's my language, okay, so bear with me. The line 4 of the hexagram is correspond to the mathematical forms, okay, so it's very high, okay. Those people are not ordinary people. They are in the domain of the reality, of divine reality, okay, because 1, 2, 3 is the animal kingdom, 4, 5, 6 is the timeless kingdom. So they there, okay, so they are not ordinary people. I don't want to be arrogant and to look down on them. They are distinguished people. But if they're so distinguished, their duty or their endeavor is to go further, okay, to the fifth line, to God's plan. But maybe for laziness, or maybe they have been influenced by bad philosophical principles, or not principle, but philosophical mumbo jumbo, they just stuck at the level of the timeless form of mathematics, and they didn't want to go to the higher form of God's plan, precisely, which is the fifth line of the aristocratic man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm correct in saying this, but did Planck also describe the particle as being simultaneously a wave and a particle at the same time?
No, it has been after him, because his big discovery was that, well, quanta was the name he invented,
yes,
okay, because right. He discovered that the electrons can only has a certain level of energy, and from there you have other first the wave and the particle stuff is an older problem, okay. Newton thought it was a particle, Christian Huygens thought it was a wave because of his optical experiment. Okay, so it was before Planck that duality was present in the mind of the thinkers. But with Planck, you have more possible measurement because he realized that the electron only can have certain level of energy. And after that, you had Dirac, you had Heisenberg that would push further that idea with mathematical formulas. And the Heisenberg equation is precisely a very complex equation, giving you the energy level of the whole electronic system. Because, for example, in an atom with the atomic number 92, you don't have one electron, you have 92 electrons. Okay, so the whole system, the Heisenberg equation, if you push it at its limit, it's not only for one electron of the atom of 92. I don't remember the name of atom 92, but you can check it with the periodic table. And it's very complex, but it's not mathematically speaking. But it's not Planck who introduced the mathematics because it came after him.
Well, I think I'm referring to, and you may be commenting on this in what you said, but the slit experiment where the photon can be, am I correct? Photon can either be a particle, behaves either as a particle or a wave, which is sort of the paradox is that they seem in contradiction, but to overcome that contradiction, you would have to accept both of those simultaneously.
Yeah, but
because they exist simultaneously.
Yes, but it's because of how we look at reality, with what instrument we look at reality.
Yes.
Meaning that reality, and here, that's what I mean by we relinquish to go to 5, okay? Mm-hmm. Because if you have an image of a wave, it's because we use certain instrument, and if you have the image of a particle, it's because we use certain instrument. Okay, yeah. It means that the reality is neither a wave nor a particle.
Yeah.
Okay, right. It's something else that we see as a particle or a wave when we use specific instruments.
Yeah. No, that's important because that's where the sleight of or the I think the messiness comes in, because what Quan just said is so important. And,
exactly.
he's not assuming that that something can ontologically, like in the essence of its being, be both two things that are opposite to each other. The essence of it may not be either one of the two things that we think we're talking about, because when we frame an experiment in one way, we'll get one set of results. If we frame it in another way, something will act more like a particle than a wave, right? So it depends how we're physically framing the experiment that is creating results. And we shouldn't necessarily assume that either result is the thing itself. There might be something that we're not even thinking about that's causing.
We could invent another measuring tool.
Yeah, and why the school of Copenhagen and in my mind just relinquished the duty of seekers of truth is that all of them got a mental breakdown, and since they found a beautiful toys with those mathematics, they just infected the next generation till now that just forget about reality, just make the kind of mathematical calculations. Okay, and it's froze that research for reality for 3 generations.
Would this distinction somewhat correlate with what Nicholas Acusa represented as a differentiation between a circle and a point? In other words, a point is in the material world, but it's a subset of actually something represented, which he represented as the quadrature of a circle. In other words, a circle is not made up of a series of points, but a circle implies causation or action within the universe, which is not distinctive points. And that's the best way, in my simple mind, that I equate it. Is that correct?
Oh no, that's absolutely brilliant, Monty. It's not in your simple mind. It's you make perfectly the distinction between the true cause and how we can make manifest to us reality. Okay, Because how we can make manifest to us reality is thanks to our intelligence and to our instrument, but it doesn't make manifest the cause. The cause has to be found within our mind when it is uplifted to the same plan, what I call number 5, which is God's plan, the cosmos.
Mathematics is just like another language, like English or French, the way I see it.
Well, one thing on the point of Kuza's amazing mind dealt a lot with the idea of the coincidence of opposites, right? And how seeming opposites can be found to be resolved in harmony, lawfully or unlawfully. And this is, I think, everything, because the school of the Copenhagen school, and Niels Bohr actually has a quote, so does Wolfgang Pauli, that that opposing identities must coexist in everything. Like there's almost like a built-in schizophrenia that they assume in all reality ontologically, that opposites must be assumed to coexist in things. Whereas Kuza would say no, that there is apparent things that seem to be opposites, like the finite and the infinite, or the point in the circle, right? Are resolved in purpose and goodness and truth and beauty. Like there's a higher substance that resolves them in reason. Versus, and then you have another school that says no, they can be resolved, but only in absurdity, in irrationally. They're all things that are apparently opposite are united in a common irrationalism that controls them both. And then that's sort of the dipolar opposite school, which gets you. I mean, a lot of occultists tend to think in this way, and I think even a lot of the quantum mechanists who think in terms of the universe of order and chaos coexisting, right? That we're all just random particles, or random atoms, right? With chaotic mutations that are unknowable intrinsically within the nucleus of all of the atoms making us up, is just random dice rolling, and genetically we're random dice rolling, mutations caused by, that are generating Darwinian evolution. It's just random. But we have this apparent order and harmony that seems to also exist with golden sections in galaxies and these intelligible words we're using to communicate. But that's a bit of an illusion being shaped and caused by chaos and randomness and irrationalism. So it makes you crazy if you try to fit all that together. At the end of the day, you drive yourself a bit nuts.
I think that everyone here is aware that the new telescope sent us a lot of data that destroy completely the standard cosmological model, and that is something big. I suppose that all of you are aware of it.
Yeah. Oh yes, very much so.
Okay.
Are there any new updates? Are there any new mind-blowing?
Well, the biggest thing in my mind is that because of that telescope, we found completely mature galaxy at the almost at the origin of the universe. Okay, and it's completely destroyed the standard model.
Right.
You betcha. Yeah.
Okay, so everything now has been destroyed, because if we want to be honest, the standard cosmological model is no more valid only because of that image.
Is it implying that there was absolutely no Big Bang, launch of the universe, or is it suggesting that there still could be a Big Bang, but it's 5 times further ago than we thought?
Well, I see, Bruce, pretty much that. I see, Bruce, that you can be easily a cosmologist.
Yeah, it's pretty much that.
That's spontaneous hypothesis.
It just means that the theory is in question. The evidence being presented from the telescope is not, endorsing current theories at all.
Quan, do you remember how
whether it pushes the Big Bang back further, which is what they're trying to do? They're still trying to stay within that model that the universe began with an explosion. But the timeline on it is now thoroughly in question. But there are a few, and I'm sure Quan would be aware of them too. There are plenty of people out there not only questioning the timeline and everything like that, but the actual methodology.
Yeah,
was there ever a Big Bang?
Yeah.
Do we conceive the origin of the universe in a completely different way?
Yeah. Do you remember an estimated date of that new old galaxy?
Oh, it's in the order. Well, you know that according to what we understand now, the universe is about 14 billion years old. Okay, and those galaxies are like 500,000 years after the beginning, which is an absolute bombshell into the standard cosmological model.
Right.
Which suggests that at 400, 500,000 years into the beginning of creation, there was nothing but gases.
Right.
Yeah. But we should be happy because we have a new playground now. Okay, with that data, everything that has been built is completely destroyed, razed to the ground.
Yeah. Goodbye dark matter. Goodbye dark energy.
Well, and also the forecast big collapse is that much more postponed, if not off the table.
Absolutely, it is absolutely postponed for now.
I keep using as my pet whipping boy, but somebody should send that information to Yuval Harari.
Oh yeah.
I don't think he's
Paul, you are the person responsible to send him a letter.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
Make it strongly worded.
Strongly worded, yeah, for sure.
His neuroplasticity capabilities, I think, are probably more reduced than your average science. He's not even a scientist. I almost called him a scientist, whatever the hell he is.
No.
And that's being very kind, Matt.
Yes. He's a pretender.
Yeah.
No, well, he's a mythologist, and a mythologist is someone important, okay? Because after all, he has a lot of influence.
Exactly.
When I say mythology, it's not derogatory, okay? Mythology is very important in human life.
Mm-hmm. He's just sucking up to some bad hombres.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally, sadly, and figuratively. There's a really amazing quote that there was Sky Shields was somebody who did really great work on science within the LaRouche organization many years ago, and he dug up some work on the Gestalt psychologists, and he spent some time working through Wolfgang Köhler's archival writings. You know which paper I'm talking about, Luke? Where he's talking about Max Planck, who was Wolfgang Köhler's teacher. And Köhler describes how Planck, while he was still a student, was encouraging Köhler and a few other bright students who were going into psychology to found a new school of psychology that would be based upon a focus on discoveries. And Köhler describes, and I'll find the quote, how Planck told them that the new paradoxes emerging in the quantum domain pertaining to the wave-particle paradox could only be resolved by redefining what the subjective-objective divide is between the universe that is presumed within science, that there's this objective reality outside of our subjective universe internally. And Planck was convinced that it was only by completely redefining that entire idea, which will be the domain or the responsibility of the Gestalt psychologist to help do, by investigating where are the moments where the wall breaks down, right? When a great scientist who has a fruitful creative mind is making a discovery, and thence, at those eureka moments, we are one with the universe, right? The universality of the truth that we're discovering objectively outside of us is internally created within us, so that the conjunction, the harmony of inside and outside, results in the eureka, right? Which by then gives you a new power of communication, of thought, of insight. Which is why Wertheimer, who worked with Köhler as the founders of the first generation Gestalt psychologists, he was doing studies with Einstein on what's his creative process, how does his mind work, and Köhler in his A Place of Value in a World of Facts book is spending a lot of time looking at cases, actual concrete cases in chemistry and in other domains of science where the mind is making real discoveries. So that was all derailed. And I think one of the later figures, or one of their collaborators, a younger idiot, not an idiot, he's brilliant, but not such a good person, named Kurt Lewin, ends up getting seduced into a different cybernetics priesthood and ends up using a lot of the techniques that were developed by the Gestalt psychologists for a new set of purposes, within the emerging new priesthood that was coming online under the growth of cybernetics and Tavistock. So that's an interesting little idea that Max Planck had, right? That the problems are not ontological problems. The problem is how we're defining the subjective objective assumptions that we have about the universe.
You described very well the transcendent moment that so many humans have, whether it's from in near-death experiences or from psychedelics, or it's that creative moment. You described it as the creative moment when someone has a eureka, and it sounds a lot like the most blissful states of those who meditate. And golly, I think you could even be describing the peak of where we could go if we get to level 6 in pursuit of God's plan, where the doors of perception, if they really were open, the folks that come back from near-death experiences, Matt, they describe what you just described as that's really, really reality. And this is a very, very little thimble, this little squeezed in meat suit we're in compared to what they say. That's the real us. And this is a very intentional adventure we're having.
It is the cultural thing of humanity that we could be doing this right now. Mm-hmm. Because what we're doing right now, like when we're riffing with each other, is like a tiny microcosm of a creative experience. And I don't think we're running out of things to say when we get activated, but it takes some time to get the process going. But once the mind is active, it is alive, and it connects us. It's not like we're coming up with all the good ideas ourselves. we're having help because we have a connection.
Musicians describe that. People who fall in love describe that. It's a real melding, and you don't know where I stop and you start. And it's the stuff of poetry and philosophy going back to the beginning of human records, I believe.
Yep.
But my point is that if you're part of this process, there's a small gap between our little group of, like, let's say 10 people, and expanding that to all of humanity. We're very close, actually, that we can do this.
You're well describing what Napoleon Hill has in Think and Grow Rich about the mastermind. And it's even what Jesus is alluding to, I believe, when he says, wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there I am. We are tapping into a greater, maybe the one and only supreme divine mind.
I am that I am.
Yes, you are.
But it really is true. Because, I have different prayer meetings that I'm involved with, and I often describe it like we are drinking from each other's well. But we're doing that exact same thing here. And we're also expanding it exponentially. And so we are tapping into each other's minds and hearts, but also God's mind and heart at the same time. So it really is true what you just said there, Luke.
I'd like to make one more comment, if I might. Matt, I'm not sure whether it was on the Duran show that you were interviewed a couple of days ago, or the Mel K show, but you described, when they're asking you about what your outlook was, you described it as a certain hope mixed with melancholy. And that's pretty well precisely what I'm feeling. This frustration in particular, I go back to many wars, from Vietnam, Iraq. So I've kind of seen things firsthand, and it's rather disturbing to me, very disturbing to me, what I'm witnessing in the Middle East right now, which has turned more from a political war, which it was heretofore, to a religious war. And they're bringing up some really satanic shit with it, and so far as what I deem as actually being human sacrifice. In other words, based on this Tower of Babel or what have you. And it brings me in consideration of a point that I would like to have flushed out and maybe enunciated more clearly insofar as our discussions on the nature and causation, but the nature of God. And it appears to be a certain tenet that was implanted somewhere way back in Christianity, not only from Darby, but going way back before Darby, on this idea that somehow God, who's supposed to be loving and the creator of good, love, truth, life, could somehow ordain that his son be sent to earth to be crucified, which is a central tenet in not only the Catholic Church, but the Anglican Church. I mean, that's basically considered to be your ticket that you got to get stamped to believe in such. And I think this idea is so thoroughly still embedded deep within the human psyche that we play it out and we justify it. For certainly God could do such a thing, then somehow we should also be justified in doing such a thing. And in our consideration of Philo and what he's enunciating and bringing out, I would just like to have that maybe in the back of our mind as a seed that could be planted to maybe fully enunciate this in more clear terms. Maybe people could get it. So that's my rant.
I'll say for myself, I don't take particular issue with that story of the sacrifice of Jesus. But I understand how the misuse of it, because I could see a very healthy interpretation of that could really do a lot of good for a soul in guilt and in a lower epistemological level that doesn't feel, that has self-hate, self-loathing, which is normalized within a sick culture, which empires always kind of create. So the idea that something so perfectly good could willingly love you so much that it will that he will sacrifice himself for you to be healed spiritually, it's psychologically could be a very useful thing. But at the same time, I recognize also what you're saying in the sense that a perverse mind will take that and will be able to use that to justify a lot of evil as well, which has been done also in the name of Christianity for sure. a lot of bad has been done for that.
I'm not attempting to make the argument that Jesus wasn't willing to be sacrificed. In other words, here was a man that stood up and was willing when the options ran out at the end. But I guess my argument is it wasn't necessarily for that to happen. In other words, perhaps there could have been a different outworking. And the idea that God preordained something to occur such as that, it's just it's oxymoronic to me. It's contrary to any kind of rationale. And it would be more hopeful for us to understand that a man would be willing to give his life for his friends, which is more empowering to me. It doesn't make God, that God, in other words, Jesus is considered a saint for fulfilling God's word. Yeah.
Are you pretending, or are you thinking that Jesus and God are not one?
No, I didn't say that. That's not what I'm implying at all. But the nature of God, in other words, he was fulfilling God's word, and he expressed the idea of Christ. In other words, it was that incarnate. But the idea that in other words, he was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, but that was a choice that he was willing to give his life due to the way things worked out. But the idea that somehow God preordained this gets back to all this other stuff, which I think is the basis for a lot of the insanity today, which justifies human sacrifice.
Because it seems to me that we were given everything, and it was demonstrated that there was no ulterior motives for us receiving everything.
What do you mean in the Bible?
Well, if I'm God and I'm going to sacrifice myself by going to earth and knowing that I will be rejected and still go through with it, even though it's painful, because I'm doing it for mankind.
Yeah, but
as
Well,
a gift.
I'm not looking at Jesus as being God in that sense. In other words, I'm looking at Jesus being a man who elevated and incorporated Christ's spirit in as a man. In other words, something that he said, even you can do greater works than I do. In other words, the idea being the body of Christ on earth is made up of people that make this choice, a conscious choice to bring about heaven into the earth. And for the idea that there's a separate God that sent his son down, which is basically the tenets of the Catholic Church today. I know that's the basic thing they present. And many orders of religion, that's kind of embedded, that there's a separate God out there that understood that he had to send his son to be sacrificed. And I just think it's the most outrageous lie that's been perpetuated in the earth today, which is bringing about this whole host of other things that we're witnessing. And we wonder, as you were contemplating, Matt, why we can't get people moved in more of a mass movement. I think they're more or less hypnotized into this belief otherwise.
So, look, I mean,
I'm glad I don't mean to go on so much.
Matt, can I reply real quick?
Yeah, you shoot out a thought. I want to shoot out a thought too as well, but go for it. Yeah.
Well, after you. You're very patient as a host. You.
All right. So my quick thought is I don't think that it's that which is at the heart of our problems, but rather the lack of ability to love our fellow man and do what's said in the book of Matthew, that one should, when Jesus was asked what's the most important of the commandments, love God, love your fellow man like you love yourself. But our inability to do that is what I see at the heart of the terrible atrocities and that particular aspect of the Bible. I agree with you. I see some problematic ideas of predestination. I mean, the Calvinism splintering sect was premised on a lot of this predestination idea too, that if God thinks it about it thus must be, we have no free will type thing. That certainly brings in a lot of Trojan horses, but it's this lack of love that I see as a bigger issue, because there's so many great Christians who did believe that Christ was, the Son of God who died for us and our sins, and they live great, powerful, anti-imperial, good lives. So it's because they have love. So that's how I do it. It's just otherwise too big of a can of worms.
We need a lot of love, and to
I'll give you a layman's perspective.
No, wait, Paul. But Bruce,
real quick. Yeah, two small cans of worms. I grew up reading the Gospels over and over and over from first grade on, and it took me a long time to think through Christianity and get to the point where I have a much bigger spiritual imagination, Monty, that gets me through life, thank God, and it has to do with the reality of our spiritual nature, and this being some kind of an adventure. And I take great solace. Like I might sound like a one-trick pony. It's all about those near-death experiences. Yes, it seems that when we die, it all comes out in the wash and we're fine. And even the comedian Bill Hicks, this is all just a ride. Looks really real. We're here for the shocks and thrills, but it's just a ride. And I wrote a book, and it's called God School 9/11 JFK. And in the chapter on God, I dissect Christianity, and I hope I make a good reasoned case about how absurd it is to think that a loving God would punish all humanity forever for the mistakes of the first two most inexperienced humans, Adam and Eve, and then solve it by incarnating in order to kill himself. Well, if you were going to do that, why didn't you just love and forgive Adam and Eve in the first place? That's the first can of worms. The second one about the war in Israel and Hamas. Many folks who have studied the conspiracies behind the mainstream news and history for centuries find it very plausible that what we're seeing today in the war in Ukraine, and now however big this war in the Middle East goes, serves the major function of distracting us from the growing tsunami of injuries and dead bodies piling up because of the COVID vaccines. I forgot you want to put this on YouTube, so oops. That was the second can of worms.
Yeah. Paul, do you want to go ahead? Because I have something to say after. Paul is no longer there.
As I was about to say, from a layman's perspective, in the sense that I don't have a great history of being part of any church, but I've always interpreted the Christ story as an act of self-sacrifice, which my interpretation, and maybe I'm being overly generous here, and it just suits my way of thinking. That's an act of love that serves as the example, the central example. That's my interpretation of the crucifixion and the reasons behind it, etc. Although, I fully agree with what Bruce just said. There are ways of looking at the story that just don't make sense at all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed.
As I said, it's a simplistic approach, but when Monty was talking about sacrifice, and I fully understand, there are countless examples of how that's been misinterpreted, not just in the Christian culture. But for me, the idea of sacrifice in a Christian sense, my understanding of it, my layman's understanding of it, was that it was representative of an act of self-sacrificial love.
I hope Jesus was real.
A different motivation.
I hope Jesus is real. Everything he says that's of a loving and self-sacrificing and trusting nature, take no thought for tomorrow. He's the grooviest hippie out there, and that's been, I think, the greatest appeal of Christianity is the beautiful heart and soul and character and loving of the Jesus Christ character. The effect on a young mind, like you make one mistake and you look at Adam and Eve. They made their first mistake, and this God is raining down an eternity of punishment. The fuckery to a mind that is inestimable.
Yeah. And I would like to say something from someone who is from another matrix completely, and I say it in a very respectful manner. Those stories are mythology for me, okay? And once again, I want to come back to the notion of institutional inertia. Let's not forget that the Bible is a very thick book, having many layers. And maybe the people at the middle or at the end did not have the courage to get rid of the first layer or the second layers, which was produced in more primitive time. And it happens in a lot of religion, and it has to be associated with the human adventure. And sometimes it's a very complicated thing than to harmonize or to make the anti-mythology coherent from a more advanced epistemological perspective, let's say 3,000 years later, compared to what happened 3,000 years before. Okay, I'm not saying that this is the perfect explanation, but that institutional inertia concerning the documents of the religion can be used as one possible explanation, among other things. And the other thing that I want to say is very down to earth too. In this confrontation in 2023, it's not only the confrontation of the branches of the Abrahamic religion, okay? There are people who are completely outside that matrix of the Abrahamic religions who have the tools of power to scare the idiots. So maybe that element would make a big difference in this confrontation in 2023 compared to 1914, 1918, or 1939, 1945, or 1963, 1973, 1992, etc. The fact that you have powerful people coming from another matrix completely, and once again, with a lot of respect, that consider everything you just said as mythology and storytelling, those powerful people will make the difference because they would not let a sectarian dispute destroy their own lives.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, right. Juan, that's a very good point. It'll be an interesting thing to see the outcome of the influence of another matrix on this particular situation. But I was just going to add to your comment about the evolution of something like the Bible, and how things can be written at one point in time, 3,000 years ago, let's say, that are in a sense obsolete now, right? And there's a great deal that's lost in translation as well. And then the Bible was so butchered, and you had the Council of Nicaea, and they decided they're going to put some things in and not other things in. If you go into the Eastern Orthodox Church, you're going to find very different things about the same series of events. But if you take something that is a little bit more accurate, if you take the Quran, which was much more specific in its documentation, right? You have the hadiths, which had to be verified by several people who heard the prophet say certain things. So it's more, let's say, it's most likely a much more precise document, for lack of a better word. So if you look at that, it is stated that the Quran has 7 layers of meaning. So, there can be technical reasons in terms of the kind of knowledge that you want to implant. If a person has to go through layers, certain other things happen within the mind when you do that. But if you look at anything that has 7 layers of meaning, so you start at layer 1, which is just the way a child would read something, right? You just take it at face value. Then you have to begin to peel away the next layer. What is it after that? And the only way to get to the next layer is that as you grow as a human being, there's a different sort of experiential level that you can bring to that. But those 7 layers can probably only be lined up with the 7 layers of internal progress that a human has. So to say that a document like the Quran, a spiritual document like the Quran, it functions as a very technical document too, but you're not going to get anywhere with it if your personal development is not aligned with the 7 layers that are available. So, but what we tend to do is we look at everything on very concrete, materialistic level. And so we can maybe get to layer 1. Maybe if we have insights, we use our intuition, which we need to develop. We might get to aspects of layer 2, but then you have so many more, right? The other thing that it would force you to do, if you think about something that has 7 different layers to it, and you're sitting as a human, and you're beginning to mentate at 7 different levels, and they're not all 7 different ideas about one thing, but they could be 7 entirely different experiences, layers of experience that, let's say, most of us have never had. That would be the form of the intellect, right? We don't want to define the intellect as being able to put words and intellectual composition together, right? We know what that kind of intellect is. But if you supersede that kind of intellect with a completely different notion of what an intellect would be, let's say your entry point is, you could take Goethe, the entry point being that if he looked at the idea of a plant, well, what's a plant kingdom, right? He sees the totality of that entire experience of what it is to be a plant, right? And there are many layers. You have to hold that whole idea in your mind simultaneously. That might be the easiest way for us to envision what the next layer of cognition might be. But then there are many more on top of that. And that layer of cognition changes the individual. So when you look at a document like that, you can't look at it at the first layer. You can't. It was never designed to be looked at just from the first layer. But if the human being is only capable of assuming that level of understanding, which is where most people are, then it gives you some organization, some sense of how to treat your fellow man decently. But that's scratching the surface.
Yeah, but
I think you may want to take some of that towards, the Bible's a flawed document, but you may want to apply some of that to the Bible. And I'm not saying the Bible has 7 layers of meaning. All I'm just saying is that that's known about the Quran.
Yeah, but I want to say that everything you say, I'm absolutely delighted with that. But what is happening on Earth right now is that the people at the plutocratic level manipulate people at the democratic level. Okay, it's layer 1 and layer 2. And I wouldn't sound very arrogant for saying that, but all the problem comes from them. And the fact that I'm not even speaking of the aristocratic man at number 5, okay? I'm saying that there are not enough number 3 people, because the people at number 3, they have emotional intelligence. They're capable to have consensus, and they're capable to do things in a reasonable manner, and they are still in the animal kingdom. So we are ruled by people at the level 2, manipulating the morons at level 1. I'm sorry I sound so arrogant for the last 2 minutes, but that is the reality. I'm not speaking even of 4 and 5.
Well, I would agree with you. That is the reality that most of us experience. That is the reality most of us live in.
Okay, so
but that does not mean that that isn't the total of that is the entirety of everything that's happening any point in time.
Yes, but I want to say that the people that are not in the same matrix than you and who are in the same matrix than me, and that would be my last arrogant proposition for tonight, there are enough people in my matrix at 3 and 4 to stop the imbecility that is happening now in West Asia. And I stop here because it would be too arrogant to keep on.
Oh, no, I love it. Be totally arrogant. It throws in a very healthy perspective. And it always is something you can take away and learn from. So I don't perceive it as arrogance at all, Quan.
I think a huge part of the solution is doing and saying as much as we can to inspire more of the powerless as a group, the powerless, who might be level 3, who might be level 4, or who might be level 1, but how to inspire them to rise up. And it's simply a function of the powerlessness, because their powerlessness, and I'm speaking as one who spent years and can still cycle through great powerlessness, it's subconscious, because they're hiding under cynicism, like, oh, what difference does it make? You know, they might even confess powerlessness, but it's that sadness, that despair. And to compensate for whatever happens in childhood through the school experience and the bad parenting that just produces 13, 14, and 15-year-olds who are not only addicted to their phones and social media without people skills, without social skills, but now there's a real epidemic of despair and depression and suicide. What's there to live for? How can we look, that's the problem to solve, not only for the humanitarian sake of their own souls and suffering, but we need more people to pressure the plutocrats who are taking us off the cliff.
But Bruce, I agree with everything you said, but I think it has not been clear. There are powerful nations with leaders at station 4 and 5 that are outside the West that would deal with the morons in the West. That's what I meant.
I heard you loud and clear, and I forgot that due to my soapbox and my passion about talking about powerlessness. And you've given me great hope with that, and I'm going to really, really enjoy that for the rest of my life, because that's a truth here in America I just don't bump into on a regular enough basis. Thank you, Quan.
But see, Quan, I'll
double up on that.
I just 1 second. I'm just before I lose this thought, because I wanted to say this, Quan. See, Quan, I think exactly what you said about another cultural matrix finally assuming a pivotal role is maybe, I don't know, I'm not a psychic, but it may be exactly what's needed. In other words, it's what I would call the larger reality of not the conflict that we're defining between the parties that we can see right here in the Western world or the Near East, right? There is a larger happening that's occurring, and that larger happening is part of the influx or the effect at an entirely different level of this different matrix. It's almost as if you're trying to turn base metal into gold, and suddenly the right ingredient, it's a mess, right? And it's going nowhere. And suddenly the right ingredient for whatever reason, is superimposed for whatever reason, and suddenly what becomes, I mean, maybe it'll make it worse, but it's also possible that it could create the jolt and the necessary direction to get this perpetual cycle that never comes to an end. Something slaps it on the back and throws it into a completely different direction.
Absolutely.
And that may be exactly if you want to call it a God-given event. It doesn't make the other culture perfect. There's no other, people think some perfect culture is going to come in. Nothing works that way, but it is the right ingredient, right? So yes, we'll have to see.
Exactly, we have to see. And I'm very down to earth, because what would be different this time is because there would be people powerful enough to inflict fear and pain to the Western plutocrats. Or plutocrats is already a compliment to them, to the Western kakistocrats, because the only way to make a kakistocrat understand things is that they know that there are people powerful enough to inflict pain and fear to them if they don't stop at a certain level. And that is the big difference compared to 1914, 1945, 1967, 1973, and etc. Because why were they so unhinged during the last century? Because nobody on earth was capable to punish them. So they think they can do anything with impunity, and all habits die hard.
They still think that. But you're right, Quan. I mean, one of the sustaining things over the last 3 or 4 years in particular has been the rise of global Six Nations and various leaders amongst them too.
I'm sorry, Paul.
Talking a language that I can relate to.
I wouldn't clear to know. Not the global South, okay? They are natural day nations. They can do nothing.
No. Yeah, okay, all right, yeah. They're the leaders, I fully agree. And as I say, it has been hard at a time, haven't we? Okay. Which gets us back a little bit to what Bruce was saying before about powerlessness. I can understand why he says it and everything like that, but precisely, what you're saying and what I'm saying is that, no, I don't feel powerless at the moment. I actually feel somewhat empowered. Seeing what I see. I mean, Matthew talks about it all of the time. I mean, Matthew's one of the most positive interviewees that you see, who is promoting that very, very idea that there is an alternative to the the globalist New World Order position that we've lived through for the last 100 years, exactly because, as you say, they felt immune, and they were immune.
They were immune, exactly. And
yeah, they still feel immune. It's catching up with them, but it's the question is, it's a little bit like what we're hearing references to biblical things all over the place in terms of the Middle East, and one of them is the Samson option. Yeah. That rather than admit defeat, or once they realise that defeat is imminent, they'll blow up the whole area, and Israel is capable. Well, to me, it's a question of, will we tip over that edge collectively, or will we pull back? And I get the sense at the moment that the tug of war is in the right direction.
Exactly. And I would like to give a practical example. The U.S. administration invited Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, to Washington recently because they needed to talk to Beijing to help them to solve the problem in West Asia. Okay, and that is an excellent sign that fear and pain has been given in enough quantity so that they began to wake up.
And the latest news that I've just read, I think this morning, Quan, is that Biden will be meeting with Xi in some upcoming forum at the United Nations.
Absolutely. So they began to wake up. Okay, and
2 days. You would hope.
And 2 days ago,
you would hope so, wouldn't you?
And 2 days ago, for the first time, Beijing paid with a digital yuan oil from Saudi Arabia. Okay, that means it's the beginning of the dollar.
Yeah.
Okay, so all those things make them wake up. Okay, and it's called fear and pain. So
learning tools, mate. Learning tools, fear and pain.
Yes, that's why I am very angry when people call them psychopath or sociopath. They are not psychopaths, they're not sociopaths. They're only plutocrats thinking that no one can punish them.
Yeah.
I have one thing, Matt, to conclude, I think, because Kuza is bringing the scientific world and he's merging it with the religious world, and he's using these images of geometry, and he uses this phrase or this uniting concept, which we don't have to figure it out right now, but he says the maximum coincides with the minimum. And that is very important to understand if you want to understand this universe.
I think that'll set the stage well for next week's reading, and maybe we could even recap a little excerpt from Kuza as well on this very important idea, which actually has a huge amount of relevance for solving a lot of these problems of geopolitics in our current age, including his dialogue amongst the Jew, Christian, and Muslim, and pagan, and Hindu. He has like an 8-person dialogue, which is his effort to try to shake people out of these religious wars that his world was being sucked into. So maybe we'll read a few Kuza excerpts before we continue on Philo next Wednesday. But yeah, guys, this has been great. I really appreciate these Wednesday nights and how we were able to jump from science to philosophy to music to geopolitics. It's a breath of fresh air. So thank you, guys.
Okay, ciao.
Matthew, before